the human face. It's really an incredible canvas, isn't it? Every line, every shade. It feels like it holds a story, whispers of where someone's ancestors came from, maybe a whole journey. And if you want a place where this idea just explodes, where faces tell these amazing tales of blending and sometimes, yeah, even tension, you really have to look at Myanmar. Some researchers actually call its people one of the richest human mosaics in Asia.
That's a very fitting description, I think. I mean, just think about it. Every single face you see there, every feature, it carries echoes of ancient migrations, kingdoms rising and falling, even the impact of conflicts from long ago. So our mission today in this deep dive is really to peel back some of those layers. We're going to explore the genetics, the geography, the history, all the things that explain why the people of Myanmar look so incredibly diverse. We want to give you, our listener, a kind of shortcut, a way to get quickly informed about this really fascinating mix of human movement and identity.
Okay, so Myanmar isn't just a country on a map. It's more like a living crossroads. You can just imagine the sheer blend of features that must have happened over thousands of years with all these different cultures meeting there. So how does the science, like modern genetics, actually back this up? What does it tell us about Myanmar's unique spot on the map?
Exactly. And the really compelling part is how, modern science does back it up. These genetic studies give us concrete proof of those ancient movements. Myanmar's location is just critical. It's nestled right there between India, China, Thailand, Laos. And historically, this wasn't just a border, it was a dynamic pathway. For millennia, you had waves of people moving in, from the Indian subcontinent eastward, from the Tibetan plateau southward, from mainland Southeast Asia westward. They all converged right there.
Wow, like a massive human funnel, sort of. What kind of genetic fingerprints did all that movement leave behind?
Well, that's where these big 2017 genetic studies are so insightful. They really map out the population's ancestry. What they found is a dominant lineage about 60 to 65%, tracing back to Tibeto-Burman populations. Now, Tibeto-Burman, just for clarity, is a huge language family group originating around Tibet and spreading across Southeast Asia. That accounts for many of the sort of East Asian features. But then you've got a really significant chunk, 20 to 25%, showing South Asian influences. Clear evidence of contact across the Bay of Bengal, and then another 10 to 15% comes from broader Southeast Asian genetic groups. These numbers aren't just abstract figures, they directly explain why you see such an amazing range of appearances today. People who might resemble Tibetans or Chinese and others who look much more like people from Bengal or Thailand. It's all there in the DNA, a real testament to that crossroads history.
That's a fascinating mix, and you can almost see this genetic tapestry playing out physically, right? Especially in skin tones across the country. There seems to be a really visible diversity that shifts depending on where you are in Myanmar.
Absolutely. It's quite noticeable. For instance, if you travel along the coasts, especially in Rakhine State or the Irrawaddy region, you'll often see darker brown complexions. And that's frequently linked to centuries of Indian Ocean trade, maritime links bringing influences from further west. But then, head north, up into the highlands near China. There you'll see lighter olive tones, sometimes yellowish undertones, much closer to populations in Tibet or southern China.
And do we have actual numbers on this, like percentages?
Yes, researchers have put figures on it. Around 70% of the population falls into that medium brown to light brown range, pretty broad middle ground. Then about 20% lean towards darker tones, like those coastal groups we mentioned, and maybe 10% show fairer complexions. That's more common among groups like the Shan, the Kachin, other upland peoples with those closer ties to northern East Asia.
Okay, but this visible difference in skin tone, it's not just biology, is it? It gets tangled up in social stuff, and sources say it can be quite controversial. There's this idea that lighter skin is often, well, preferred, especially in cities.
That's a really critical point, and it's not unique to Myanmar, unfortunately. This preference for lighter skin often ties back to colonial history, global media pushing certain beauty standards, maybe historical class associations. So yeah, you do see urban elites sometimes using cosmetic whitening products. It's a visible sign of these external pressures. What's important here is understanding how deeply these outside ideas about beauty can get embedded, sometimes overshadowing local or traditional views and creating, well, a kind of social ladder based on skin shade.
Sounds like a real pressure point for people trying to figure out where they fit. What about ethnic minorities? How do they view this?
Exactly. And this raises an important question, doesn't it? How do these external beauty standards clash with someone's cultural identity? Because, on the other side of the coin, for many ethnic minority groups, especially those with strong traditions and connections to their land, darker skin tones can be seen completely differently. They might view it as a mark of their heritage, a sign of resilience, an authentic link to their ancestors and the environment they've lived in for generations. So what might be seen as less desirable by some in the mainstream could actually be a source of deep cultural pride for others. It really shows how tangled up appearance, identity, and social views can be.
Right. Okay, moving on from skin tone. Let's talk about eyes. They can be such a powerful clue to ancestry, can't they? In Myanmar, it seems overwhelmingly dark brown and black eyes dominate, like over 90%.
That's right. The vast majority have dark eyes. But even within that, you see these clear genetic markers from East Asia, especially in certain groups. Take epicanthic fold, that little fold of skin at the inner corner of the eye, or distinct almond-shaped eyes. You see those more often among the Shan, Chin, and Kachin communities. They're specific indicators of that dominant Tibeto-Burman and wider East Asian ancestry we talked about. What's fascinating here is that these aren't just random traits. They're genetic signatures, likely adaptations over time to different environments, maybe like the bright, cold conditions found on the Tibetan Plateau long ago.
To mostly dark eyes, but with those East Asian features showing up, are there any lighter eyes at all?
It's rare, but yes, occasionally you do find lighter shades, hazel, maybe lighter browns, perhaps in about 3 to 5% of people. And these tend to show up more in border areas, particularly those sharing a border with South Asia. But the key thing to understand is these aren't usually from recent mixing. They're seen as genetic echoes of ancient contact. Think remnants of those really early migrations and trade connections from thousands of years ago before modern borders even existed. It just reminds you how long this mixing has been going on.
That's incredible. Ancient echoes in eye color. And hair, I suppose, tells a similar story of mixing. What do we usually see with hair in Myanmar?
Well, most people do have black hair, yes, but brown shades aren't uncommon either. But the texture variation is where it gets really interesting, again, pointing to that diverse gene pool. Research breaks it down roughly like this. About 65% have straight hair, which is pretty typical for East and Southeast Asia. Around 25% have wavy hair, suggesting more of a blend. And then about 10% have curly or even frizzy hair.
Curly or frizzy. That seems less typical for the region generally. Where does that show up most?
You're right, it stands out a bit. And that texture, the curly or frizzy kind, it's noticeably more common in southern coastal populations. Which makes complete sense, right? When you think about their history of maritime trade, centuries of contact across the Indian Ocean. These communities would have had more sustained interaction with people from South Asia, maybe even indirectly from places further west through those old trade routes. That leads to a greater mix of hair types. So yeah, while the overall patterns might resemble nearby regions, Myanmar's hair story is definitely more mixed because of its unique position as this gateway, pulling in influences from multiple directions.
Okay, so we've talked skin, eyes, hair, but maybe it's the actual structure of the face, the facial architecture, that really highlights this diversity most dramatically.
That seems to be where you see the clearest differences between ethnic groups. I'd agree. It's very apparent there, and anthropologists have actually measured these differences. Take the Bein majority, making up about 68% of the country. Typically, you see medium-width faces, often high cheekbones, and noses that are a bit broad. Now contrast that with, say, the Shan or the Kachin people. You'll often find narrower faces, maybe those almond eyes we discussed, and straighter noses, features that align more closely with Southeast and East Asian neighbors.
And what about the groups with stronger historical links to South Asia?
You see a different combination of features there, too. Groups like the Rakhine and the Rohingya often have broader noses, fuller lips, and generally those darker skin tones we mentioned earlier. It all points to those strong South Asian connections over centuries. Here's where it gets really interesting when you look at the actual measurements. Anthropological studies from 2019 found remarkable variation, up to 15% variation in just nasal width between different ethnic groups in Myanmar, and about 12% variation in craniofacial angles. Craniofacial angles basically describe how the face bones are structured, the overall shape. To find a 15% difference in something like how wide someone's nose is within one country, that's quite extraordinary. It really underscores just how mixed and yet distinct these groups are living together.
Wow, 15%. That's significant. Not just a tiny difference. It really drives home the point about the mixing. Okay, shifting slightly to overall build. What about height? What are the averages and any noticeable trends in Myanmar?
Yeah, health surveys give us a pretty good picture. On average, men in Myanmar are around 166 centimeters, which is about 5 foot 5 inches. And women average about 154 centimeters, so roughly 5 foot and half an inch. Now, these numbers are fairly close to averages across Southeast Asia, but they are generally shorter than, say, global averages. But here's an interesting trend. Younger people, especially in urban areas, are getting taller. A study in 2021 pointed out about a 3-centimeter increase in average male height over the last 40 years or so, and that's strongly linked to things like better nutrition, improved healthcare access, the kind of changes you see with economic development.
So we're seeing history reflected, but also ongoing changes from modern life. Are there regional height differences too, like with facial features?
Oh, absolutely. Just like other traits, height varies across the country too. Up in the north, groups like the Kachin and Shan, often living in more mountainous areas, tend to be taller on average. Could be genetics, could be diet, probably a mix. Conversely, down in the south, people tend to average a bit shorter. So again, these regional differences just add another layer to that complex picture of Myanmar's human diversity.
And all this incredible diversity leads us into some tricky territory, doesn't it? This whole debate about a typical Myanmar look. Some people apparently argue the Bamar look, medium skin, straight hair, high cheekbones, is kind of the national standard because they're the majority. But the sources we looked at make it clear that's a really contentious idea.
Contentious is putting it mildly. And crucially, ethnic minority groups strongly push back against that. Their argument is, look, Myanmar's identity, its national image, has to reflect all 135 officially recognized ethnic groups, not just the Bamar majority. And this is where things get incredibly sensitive, where identity politics can become really, well, volatile. Take the Rohingya situation, for example. It's a deeply tragic and complex issue. They are a Muslim minority, and despite scientific evidence, genetic evidence, pointing to their presence in Rakhine State for centuries, they face terrible persecution and denial of citizenship. Often their features, which tend to lean more South Asian, have been used in official narratives to portray them as foreign, as outsiders. So while scientists present evidence of long-term settlement, deep historical roots, politics and prejudice often just ignore or dismiss that. It's a stark example of how appearance gets tangled up in belonging and rights.
So it's not just about how people look, it literally becomes about who belongs and who doesn't in the eyes of some. Heavy.
It is incredibly heavy. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see this dangerous line where biological diversity can be twisted into political division. Physical differences, which should just be descriptive, can get weaponized in debates about national identity. Not just to exclude people, but sometimes to actively deny their history and their right to belong. This isn't just about looks anymore. It touches the very core of citizenship, human rights, and whether entire communities are recognized within their own country. It really highlights the immense pressure and anxiety that looking different can bring, especially when it bumps up against state power or dominant beauty norms.
Let's try and make this diversity really tangible for a moment. Imagine you, our listener, walking through a busy market in Yangon. You can almost smell the spices, the fruit, hear the chatter, the bargaining. It's buzzing with life. And as you walk through, look at the faces. You might see a Bamar woman, maybe with that smooth olive skin, almond eyes, carefully selling tea leaves. Right next to her, maybe a Rican fisherman, darker skin, maybe wavy or curly hair, haggling over the price of fish. And then just down the way, perhaps a Shan trader, sharper cheekbones, fairer complexion, counting out coins.
That's a perfect image because it captures the emotional side too. For so many people, their appearance is tied to this deep pride in who they are, their ethnic identity. You might hear, say, a Kachin elder talk about their distinct Highland features with real reverence, as symbols of their history and strength. Or you could imagine a Rohingya mother teaching her kids that their darker skin isn't something negative, but part of a heritage stretching back centuries, a sign of their resilience.
So it's pride, connection to history. But you
Yeah.
mentioned tension earlier. What's the flip side, the difficult part?
Well, the difficult truth is that the very same differences that are a source of pride for one group can also be used to fuel exclusion or discrimination against another. The emotional weight of just looking different in Myanmar can be really significant. People can feel caught between, on one hand, these external beauty standards, often favoring that East Asian type fairness, pushed by media and global trends, and on the other hand, their own lived identity, their own heritage, which might celebrate something completely different. So yes, you see coexistence in that Yangon market scene, people working side by side. But underneath, there's often this complex dynamic playing out around identity, recognition, belonging, and appearance is right at the heart of it. So when you pull it all together, the core message from the science, genetics, history, anthropology, it's crystal clear. You simply cannot sum up the people of Myanmar with a single face or a single look. It's impossible. They really are this incredible tapestry woven from threads coming from South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, all layered together through centuries of trade, kingdoms rising and falling, people adapting, mixing. And this diversity, as we've discussed, it's both a huge strength, a source of incredible cultural richness, but it can also be, a fault line at times.
Right. And when you think about that history being etched onto every face, whether it's someone with fairer skin from the Shan Hills or someone with darker skin like a Rohingya child or a Bamar student with wavy hair, you're literally looking at living history. So maybe the real question isn't just why do they look so different, but maybe it's more like how can all these differences be seen and felt as a shared heritage, something that unites rather than divides? Hmm, that feels like the bigger question here, something for all of us to think about.
I think that's exactly right. Because ultimately, our appearances, our features, they shouldn't be walls that separate us. They're more like bridges, aren't they? They're living proof that human history, with all its movement and complexity and beauty, is always, always written on our faces.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Myanmar's incredible, complex human mosaic.